There is a rule, an unwritten rule. A rule that every military commander, every defense secretary, and every president in American history has understood instinctively. You do not fire your top general in the middle of a war. Not during the Civil War, not during World War II, not during Korea, not during Vietnam, not during Iraq, not during Afghanistan. You do not fire the man commanding your army while that army is in active combat. On Thursday, April 3rd, 2026, day 35 of Operation Epic Fury, Pete Hegseth did exactly that. General Randy George, the 41st Chief of Staff of the United States Army, was told to retire immediately. No warning, no transition period, no reason given. Effective immediately. The same day, the man actively working to get interceptor missiles and soldiers into theater to protect American forces in the Middle East was shown the door. An unnamed U.S. official said 3 words about the firing. 3 words that have never been said about a peacetime firing, let alone a wartime one. It's insane. This is not a story about Pentagon politics. This is a story about what happens to a military when loyalty replaces competence at the top of a chain of command, while an active war is still being fought. If you've been watching this channel for analysis that goes where the headlines won't, subscribe right now. Hit that bell. It takes 2 seconds. What you're about to hear is a picture that the official briefings are not drawing, and it starts right now. Understand who General Randy George is, because the man they fired was not a bureaucrat. He was not a desk general. He was not a political appointment who wandered into the Army from a think tank. Randy George commissioned as an infantry officer from West Point in 1988. He served in the Gulf War. He deployed to Afghanistan. He deployed to Iraq. He commanded at every level of the Army's hierarchy, rising to lead an entire corps before becoming the Army's most senior uniformed officer in 2023. He had more than a year left in his standard 4-year term. Just 2 weeks before he was fired, George was in Louisiana. He was personally observing 82nd Airborne Division training, the same 82nd Airborne that is now deploying to the Middle East. He was on the ground, watching the soldiers who were about to enter the most volatile military theater on Earth, making sure they were ready. He spoke to reporters that day about the critical need to accelerate weapons production to keep up with the demands of the Iran war. He said, "This gets back to how we build this stuff faster. We're talking about this with everything, not just interceptors, every missile, everything that we're doing." A man focused entirely on fighting a war and keeping American soldiers alive was fired 11 days later. No reason was given. That absence of a reason is itself a statement. Now understand the timing. Because the day the firing happened is not coincidence. April 1st, Trump delivers his primetime address on the Iran war. Says the operation is nearing completion. Says Iran has no radar, no anti-aircraft, no spotters. Says American planes are floating freely over Iranian skies. April 2nd, the Pentagon quietly begins the process of removing the Army's top officer. April 3rd, 2 American aircraft are shot down over Iran in a single day. The first combat losses of piloted U.S. aircraft in the conflict. 2 rescue helicopters are hit. A rescue firefight erupts in broad daylight in the Iranian mountains. April 3rd, same day, George is officially out, effective immediately. A U.S. general who was actively coordinating the movement of soldiers and missiles into a war zone was removed on the same day that war zone produced the worst single-day aircraft losses of the entire conflict. A senior U.S. official told reporters, "Here is a 4-star general who is actively working to get equipment and people into theater to protect U.S. forces, and you fire him in the middle of a war?" That official spoke anonymously, because in the current Pentagon, saying that out loud with your name attached ends your career too. The man who replaced George tells the real story. General Christopher Leneve is now the acting Army Chief of Staff. He is Hegseth's former personal military aide. He previously commanded the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. He left that command after less than 2 years. That job is typically held for 2 full years. After the 82nd, Leneve became a special assistant at Army Forces Command. Then he went to South Korea to lead the 8th Army. On the night of Trump's inauguration, Leneve called into the Commander-in-Chief's ball from South Korea on a video link. He said, "Sir, on behalf of the brave men and women who serve under my command, congratulations on your victory as the 47th President of the United States. Welcome back, Mr. President." Trump's response was immediate. He said, "Is this man central casting or what? They're not going to play games with you. I like to see that. Nobody is playing games with that man." That moment, that phone call, that loyalty signal, is the reason Christopher Leneve is now in command of the United States Army during an active war. Not experience, not combat record, not strategic vision. A phone call from South Korea on inauguration night. The Pentagon spokesman who announced Leneve's appointment said he was completely trusted by Secretary Hegseth to carry out the vision of this administration without fault. Without fault. Not without hesitation, not without error, without fault. The language of unconditional compliance applied to the appointment of the country's top Army officer in wartime. This was not a single firing. It was a purge. On the same day George was removed, Hegseth also fired Major General William Green, the Army's chief of chaplains. Green had been in that role since 2023. In the entire history of the United States Army, No chief of chaplains has ever been fired by a defense secretary. Not once. Not in World War I, not in World War II, not during Korea, not in Vietnam. Never. Until April 3, 2026. Hegseth had previously made a video message telling chaplains to focus less on self-help and self-care and more on God and warriors. The message was clear. Conform to the vision or leave. General David Hodney was also fired the same day. Hodney led the Army Transformation and Training Command, the organization specifically designed to accelerate the adoption of new technology and new tactics for the modern battlefield. The organization built to make the Army faster, smarter, and more lethal in conflicts exactly like the one being fought right now. The man responsible for modernizing the Army for future warfare, fired on day 35 of an active war. With no replacement with equivalent expertise immediately ready, with no reason given. 3 generals, 1 day, 0 explanations. George is not the beginning of this story. He is a milestone in a much longer campaign. Since Trump returned to the White House, Hegseth has removed more than a dozen of America's most senior military officers. The list reads like a decapitation of institutional military knowledge. General C.Q. Brown, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position in the United States, fired. He was the first black Air Force Chief of Staff in American history. Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, fired. She was the first woman ever to lead the Navy. Admiral Linda Fagan, Commandant of the Coast Guard, fired. She was the first woman ever to lead the Coast Guard. Air Force Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz, head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, fired. The specific trigger for his firing? His agency produced an honest intelligence assessment in June 2025 that found U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities were less expansive and less effective than Trump had publicly claimed. He told the truth about the war. He was fired for it. Admiral Alvin Holsey, head of Southern Command, fired in the middle of an operation he was overseeing. The Army's top lawyer, fired. The Navy's top lawyer, fired. The Air Force's top lawyer, fired. The legal architecture designed to advise military leaders on what is lawful in war, systematically dismantled. The pattern is not subtle. Every officer removed for producing inconvenient intelligence. Every officer associated with the previous administration. Every officer who might say no when ordered to do something that crosses a legal or strategic line. What remains is a command structure selected for loyalty, populated by officers who called into inauguration balls and said the right words at the right moment. Now look at what is happening simultaneously with the purge. Because the timing of these firings against this specific military backdrop is not coincidence. Thousands of soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division have started arriving in the Middle East. The 82nd Airborne is America's premier rapid deployment ground combat force. It is not a peacekeeping unit. It is not a logistics command. It is a division specifically designed to drop into hostile territory fast, fight hard, and hold ground until heavier forces arrive. Its new commander, the man who just became acting Army Chief of Staff, previously led the 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg. The Trump administration has refused, repeatedly and specifically, to answer questions about whether ground troops will be deployed inside Iran. Trump himself has mentioned seizing Karg Island, Iran's most critical oil export terminal in the northern Persian Gulf. He reportedly told advisors he wants to take the oil. Karg Island handles approximately 90% of Iran's oil exports. Seizing Karg Island would require ground forces, amphibious assault forces, airborne forces, exactly the kind of forces that are now arriving in the Middle East under a new acting commander who Hegseth personally trusts to carry out orders without fault. The Army's top officer, a man who might ask difficult questions about the logistics, the casualty projections, the supply chain requirements, and the legal framework for a ground invasion of Iran, was removed the day before those conversations accelerate. His replacement will not ask those questions. His replacement was selected specifically because he will not ask those questions. There is a historical precedent for a U.S. president removing a senior general in wartime. It has happened once in modern memory. Once. In April 1951, President Harry Truman fired General Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War. MacArthur was the most celebrated American general alive, a hero of World War II, a man of enormous stature and public prestige. Truman fired him anyway. The reason Truman fired MacArthur is important. MacArthur had publicly defied presidential authority. He had issued unauthorized ultimatums to enemy commanders. He had publicly contradicted the president's strategic decisions. He had, in short, behaved as though he, not the civilian commander-in-chief, was running the war. MacArthur was fired for being too independent. Randy George was fired for being too honest. Those are opposite problems. And the fact that the same outcome, removal, applies to both tells you everything about what the current administration values in a military commander. MacArthur's firing caused a national firestorm, congressional hearings, massive public debate. A sustained reckoning with civilian control of the military. George's firing was announced in a social media post. Sean Parnell posted it on X with 4 sentences. "We wish him well in his retirement." And that was it. The political reaction has been muted. Republicans in Congress, who would have spent months investigating a Democratic president for something like this, have largely said nothing. The silence is a form of permission. Here is the institutional consequence that most coverage is missing entirely. George was not just the Army's top officer. He was the Army's institutional voice inside the Pentagon. When Hegseth proposed something that would cost lives unnecessarily, reduce combat effectiveness, or violate the laws of war, George was the officer whose job it was to say so, firmly, professionally, through proper channels. That function, frank, honest military advice given to civilian leadership by officers who are protected by their rank and their institutional position, is not bureaucratic formality. It is the mechanism that has prevented catastrophic military mistakes for generations. It is how civilian leaders know when a plan looks good on a PowerPoint but will fail under fire. It is why, when President Johnson was planning the early escalation in Vietnam, his military advisors were able to tell him, even if he didn't listen, that it would not work as designed. It is why, when the Iraq War went wrong, there were senior officers on record warning that it would. Every general Hegseth has fired had the institutional standing to give that kind of advice. Every general he has replaced them with was selected for alignment, not expertise. Every lawyer he has removed was there to advise on what is legal. Every intelligence officer he has pushed out was there to tell the truth about what is actually happening on the ground. The system that exists to save an administration from its own worst impulses has been methodically dismantled. And now, a new army chief who was selected because Trump said he looked like central casting is in command of soldiers deploying to the most dangerous military theater on Earth. Defense officials who spoke to reporters described the mood inside the Pentagon after the firings as stunned. The word that kept appearing, in reports from multiple separate outlets, from multiple separate anonymous officials, was the same word: insane. Not surprising, not unfortunate, not concerning, insane. These are not critics of the administration. These are people inside the building. Career military officers and defense officials who have worked for Republican and Democratic administrations. People who, by professional temperament and institutional culture, do not reach for dramatic language. People who speak in the measured vocabulary of risk assessment and operational analysis. They are using the word insane. One official captured the specific absurdity of the moment. A 4-star general actively working to get interceptor missiles and troops into a war theater was removed in the middle of that effort. The interceptors he was trying to accelerate are the ones American soldiers are depending on to shoot down Iranian missiles over their bases. He was fired while doing that job, mid-task, effective immediately. Here is the question that everyone inside the building is asking, but nobody outside it is yet asking loudly enough. Who is left to say no? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, gone, replaced by someone the administration trusts. The Army Chief of Staff, gone, replaced by Hegseth's former aide. The Chief of Naval Operations, gone. The Coast Guard Commandant, gone. The head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, fired after producing honest intelligence. The service lawyers, fired. The Army's Modernization Commander, fired. Who remains? Officers selected for loyalty. Officers who called into inauguration balls. Officers who will carry out the vision of this administration without fault. If the administration decides, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, as Trump's own timeline suggests, to order a ground assault on Karg Island, or a broader ground operation inside Iran, or something else that the previous generation of military officers would have pushed back on with evidence and analysis and honest risk assessment, who in that building will say what needs to be said? The answer right now is nobody with the rank, the institutional standing, and the job security to make it stick. The United States Army has spent 250 years building a tradition. The tradition is this: civilian leaders command, military leaders execute. But military leaders also advise, honestly, candidly, even when the advice is unwelcome. The advice is protected. The advisor cannot be punished for the content of honest counsel, delivered through proper channels. That tradition was never perfect. It was sometimes ignored. It was sometimes subverted. But it existed. It functioned. It saved lives. It is being systematically retired, general by general, effective immediately. With a social media post and 4 sentences. Day 35 of a war with no defined endpoint. 2 aircraft shot down in a single day. An intelligence assessment saying Iran still has half its missiles. A diplomatic dead end. An acting army chief selected by the man who was fired from the 82nd Airborne before completing a standard tour. Promoted because he congratulated the right person on the right night. The 82nd Airborne is in the Middle East. The man who once commanded it now commands the entire army. The administration is asking no public questions about ground troops, and every officer who might have given an inconvenient answer has been removed. Something is coming. The shape of it is not confirmed, but every piece of what is being put into place, the troops, the leadership, the silence, the firings, is pointing in one direction. If this analysis gave you a frame that the press briefings are providing, share it right now. One click. And if this is the first time you've watched this channel and you want this level of depth every time something breaks, subscribe. The next video is already being built. You will not want to miss what comes next.